It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Steve Bell, owner and chief executive officer of Pacific Crest Industries, which most notably includes Bellmont Cabinet Company. Bellmont is a family-owned cabinet manufacturer located in Sumner, Washington, dedicated to product innovation, functionality, and timeless yet trend-setting styles. The mission of Bellmont Cabinets is to leave the world a better place, building integrity, respect, and responsibility as stewards of the community and environment. Steve started his company in his garage in the 70s and built it into a 200-people, $30 million a year maker of high-end cabinets. Then he had to rebuild it again when the high-rise business went away with the recession and revenue plunged over 60%. His sons are now a key part of the Bellmont tradition as it now reaches to almost 300 employees. Steve Bell, welcome into the corner office.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I know we spoke a couple of months ago and, we're into year 2 of the pandemic and, that's kind of hot topic for so many folks talking these days. How are you personally doing and how are your employees and how have you fared through these interesting times?
Well, last year, April and May were disastrous.
For most everyone in so many ways.
The governor of the state of Washington shut down residential construction and that hurt us badly.
Right.
But then starting in June, we came back with a vengeance. And right now our sales are double of what our revenues were last year. Double.
So the pent up demand really is true in your industry. It sounds like
it's crazy. We've never seen anything even close to what we're experiencing right now. But then the supply chain worldwide is messed up. We are really struggling with getting product out of Europe, Asia, and even domestic products. And every single vendor that we have is raising prices, so we consequently have to raise prices as well.
Right. Well, have you been well though, and avoided the pandemic and your family and friends and employees, or have you had some hits to that as well from a health standpoint?
My family's done great. We have not had it. We've had a few employees, but they're isolated cases. We haven't had anything running through the factory per se. But we've had probably a dozen employees that have had it at some stage, but we've been following a lot of protocols and have been able to manage it.
Yeah, well, that's great, Steve. Well, I'm so happy to hear that. Well, let's talk about you. I know your career spanned over 40 years, and gosh, I would love to hear kind of how it all started. Tell me a little about your early years, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Well, I was raised as a preacher's kid, and so we moved around quite a bit.
PK.
Yeah, PK. I grew up mostly in Longview, Washington, and then graduated from high school down in Gladstone, Oregon, which is a suburb of Portland.
Right.
I always had a hankering for business. My dad thought I would go into the ministry, but I didn't feel called to that. I always just felt a calling to be in some kind of business.
Yeah.
So I came up to Seattle in the early 70s to explore commercial diving.
Oh.
And so I spent 2 years in the commercial diving business in Puget Sound. until I met my wife to be, Carolyn. And then everything changed.
as it does. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. Brothers and sisters in the family growing up?
I have 5 siblings.
Oh, wow.
They all live in the Portland area. My mother is still alive at 97 and a half years old.
Fantastic.
My father passed away about 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And was mother involved in Dad's work as well, or is she focusing mostly on the family?
Well, she kept my dad in line.
Everyone needs one of those.
She was a great mom and juggled a lot of balls. She was also a nurse. She was a practicing nurse and raised 6 kids and I remember my dad during the 60s, he was making about $400 a month as a pastor, and they raised 6 kids on that. So
that's incredible. Yeah, great. Well, God was involved in that. Did you come to the church early, come to Christ early, and kind of commit yourself, or did that something that happened later in life?
Well, I accepted Jesus as my Savior watching Billy Graham when I was 6 years old.
Cool. That's great. Black and white TV, I imagine.
Black and white, absolutely. It really didn't become my faith until I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember going to a conference here in Seattle. I didn't want to go, but because it cost $20 and I didn't have that, and an elderly man in the church I was attending came up to me and gave me $20 and said, "Steve, I'd really like for you to go to this."
Oh, wow.
And so I had no choice. I had to go. But God used that weekend to hit me with a 2x4 and said, I'm not waiting any longer for you. You belong to me. And it started a fire burning in me that's never gone out, although it has gone down to an ember at times, and God brings out his billows, usually in the form of a crisis,
right?
And has to get the flame going again. But
I love it. So at 19, were you a college student then?
Yeah, I was in college at Highline Community College. I was taking their underseas technology program.
Right.
So I have my AAA degree in underseas technology. It's been very, very useful in the cabinet business.
What attracted you originally to the diving? Was it more of a sport and enjoyed doing the diving that led to the commercial aspect of it, or did you kind of see a commercial opportunity as an entrepreneur and decided to learn how to dive? Which way was it?
Well, my buddy got me into scuba diving in high school, and then he's the one who discovered this commercial diving thing. And there was a promise to make a lot of money if you went down worked on the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico or the North Sea of Scotland. And so I was attracted to that and thought, wow, that'd be a great adventure. So
something tells me you didn't go down that road, though.
No, I met Carolyn and fell in love and decided that probably wasn't much of a life for a family. And her father was a home builder.
Okay.
And so after we got married, I went to work for Fred Lang, and he taught me how to build houses. So
yeah. So got started that way. And then, how did you kind of zero in on the cabinet part of the business and how that, came about?
Well, our daughter was born in 1976, and Carolyn had been working at Boeing, and we wanted to allow her to stay at home with the baby. And so I asked my father-in-law if I could build cabinets in my garage to make a little bit of extra money. And he asked me, well, do you know how to do that? And I said, well, I did have ninth grade wood shop.
You still, that utility bench was around somewhere, or did you make the pump light? Right?
I think I can figure it out. And so he was gracious enough to let me build some of those apple crates and call them cabinets for his houses, and I steadily improved. And by the end of the 70s, we were building about 30 homes a year, and I was his superintendent. And then we hit the first great recession of my lifetime back in 78, 79, when inflation was rampant and interest rates were going sky high, and the building business just crashed because at 15% interest rate, people couldn't afford to buy houses.
Those are the Jimmy Carter years, I think,
that was I used to call it the Jimmy Carter recession, and anyway, I won't go political, but
I remember, I was just out of high school at that time, and I remember how, it was just crazy how much inflation was there. And then didn't Gerald Ford come in next, I think, or of course Nixon was in between, right?
Ford was before Carter, and right. Carter was 4 years, and then Reagan came in, and
that's right, Reagan came afterwards, right?
Those were really hard times. I launched out on my own and hung out my shingles, so to speak. We'll work for food,
and pay my bills. So did you stop working for Mr. Lang then at the time?
Yes.
Or was that business sold?
Yeah, his business just died, and I had to feed my family, so I managed to get a number of remodel jobs, and I ended up remodeling a big home for a dentist up in Seattle.
Huh.
And that was fairly lucrative for me, and I had a number of employees, and then he introduced me to his friend who owned a dental supply company, and that led to me becoming a tenant improvement contractor building dental offices. And it was also during that time that I had my first introduction to laminate type cabinetry. And that little bit of experience served me well later on in the cabinet business.
Right. And you mentioned a number of employees. Who was your first hire when you first got started with Bellmont?
Back in 79 and 80, I hired a kid that was in my youth group at the church I was attending.
Right.
And then my brother-in-laws went to work for me, and I just started hiring different assistants throughout the early 80s.
Were most of the people actually building the cabinets at that time? Were those some of your first hires, or did you have to kind of fill out the executive suite, so to speak?
There was no executive suite. It was me and one or two helpers, and we were building cabinets or we were remodeling houses. And so I would get up in the morning and spend a little bit of time in the Word, and then I'd go to work all day, and I'd come home and have dinner with my wife and the babies, and then I'd do all my book work and sales work, and I did that for 10, 15 years, just worked pretty much around the clock.
Go to bed and do it all over again. Were you kind of integrating faith and work at that time, at that stage of the company's life?
Honestly, Brant, I didn't know what that word meant. I was just trying to feed my family.
Sure.
And people have asked me through the years, well, what were your motivations and how'd you get into faith and work? And I said, my motivation was pure survival.
Right.
Because I started working for these dentists, this dental supply guy, and pretty soon my business ballooned up to 7 or 8 employees, and I had projects going all over Western Washington. And then I got the phone call from my attorney one morning. And he says, Steve, are you sitting down? And I go,
oh, goodness.
Yes. And he goes, did you read the newspaper this morning? I go, no, I don't get the paper. And he says, well, you better pick up a copy of today's Seattle Post-Intelligencer because your dentist buddy is on the front page.
Oh, goodness.
He just got arrested up in Vancouver, British Columbia with a briefcase full of cocaine on him.
Oh, gosh. Oh, goodness.
So these 2 guys that I was primarily working for were involved in a drug smuggling ring.
Drug smuggling. Oh, my gosh. Wow.
And they had been, the FBI and the Drug Enforcement Agency had been following them and wiretapping them because they were involved with organized crime.
Wow.
And my world came crashing down. They owed us at that time in 1981 over $100,000.
Oh, goodness.
And I never saw a dime of it.
Yeah. Tough. So what was the pivot at that time? That's when the embers were smoldering a little bit.
Well, yeah, God used that as a bellows. I was full of pride, and I thought I was God's gift to the world of business at 29 years old. And I remember sitting in a conference room with my attorney and my CPA, and they said, "Steve, you've just simply been had, and we don't see any choice for you except to file bankruptcy."
Wow.
And there's just no other options. And I said, I know that it doesn't look good, but I've been reading my Bible, and there's a verse in Philippians 4:19 that says, "My God will supply all your need according to his riches and glory through Christ Jesus."
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming God for the mess I'm in, but I'm going to rely on him to help me get out of it. And my dad taught me to be a man of my word. My word is my bond. And if it takes me the rest of my life, I'm going to pay all of these people back. And this attorney, this condescending, older to younger man said, son, your intentions are admirable, but that's just not the way the world works.
Yeah.
Within a month, you'll have a dozen lawsuits filed against you, and your life is going to become a living hell. And I said, "Sir, life's already a living hell." And right. Maybe you're right. Maybe I will have to do this, but first I'm going to try it my way.
Yeah.
And my way was to write a letter and send it to every single person I owed money to. Then I followed up with a personal visit or phone call and just asked them to be merciful. And
give you some time.
Give me time. I said I wasn't asking for a dime of discount. I would be willing to pay them every dime with interest as long as they let me do it on my terms.
Right.
But I had to be able to stay in business. And I had an elder. I was involved in a church, and one of the elders had built a successful trucking company. And I went out for coffee with him one night, and he said, and I explained the situation, and he said, "Steve, here's what I've done in the past when I got in trouble financially, is that I compartmentalized that debt. And I put it in a bucket, and I went to all of my suppliers and said, please allow me to stay in business. And I promise I'll be current on everything current. And if you'll allow me to chip away at the bad debt."
Right.
And that's exactly what I did, is I just set all of these bills in a bucket, and I went and to every single supplier and just asked them for some grace. And
you met with each one personally?
Every one of them.
And how was it received?
Well, no one ever sued me. I never had one lawsuit. And every single month for 6.5 years, every person I owed money to heard from me, either in the form of a check or a phone call.
Right. The check if the money was available, and the phone call if it wasn't.
That's exactly right. And it took 6.5 years. I think it was 1987 or 88, and we paid off the final bill. But it also, it left an indelible mark on me. We were struggling financially. It set me back at least 10 years financially.
But you built integrity and respect and responsibility, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that, is lacking so much in business, and why we're such a litigious society. I bet you're still doing business with some of those folks.
I am. I'm doing business with a couple of those suppliers, one of which I do millions of dollars a year with on an unsecured open line of credit.
Fabulous. Yeah.
And they've become good friends.
Right.
But it was also during that time I realized I took responsibility for what happened. I knew that I was culpable and that I was naive and inexperienced. Right. And so I said, God, if you'll allow me to do this again, I promise I'll learn how to do business the right way. So I took correspondence courses. This is before computers.
Right, sure.
I took correspondence college level courses in financial management and cash flow accounting and double entry accounting. And I learned business through correspondence. I would I would get a lesson, I'd do my homework, and I'd send it in, and they'd grade it, and they'd send me another one. But I taught myself business, and
right.
It has served me well.
Served you well since.
I've had a financial statement in hand every single month for 40 years.
Yeah, right. Got to know where the cash is. Well, let's talk a little bit about leadership. I know that you built the company up to 200, and I know your sons are now growing that even further. What were some of those early leadership challenges you faced? Perhaps with some of those friends that you brought in early on, and what were some of the lessons learned during those days?
Well, that is you've struck on one of my regrets in life and business, and that is that through the early years, I did lose some friends because I hired friends that I wanted them to grow with me, but they just simply weren't capable of the mental and personal and financial growth that was needed. And eventually I had to let those friends go, and in order to protect the business. One of the things I've had to learn is that the business is more important than any one individual. That you have to protect the whole. If you're not willing to protect the whole, then all of the rest of it doesn't matter, because it won't be there. And you also have to learn to protect your finances. We haven't been intentionally late on a bill since the mid 80s. Wow. I also had to learn. I think that people ask me sometime what was the toughest point in business, and it was going from 10 to 20 employees.
Wow.
Because I had to let go. I had to learn to trust other people, and other people won't ever do the job as well as you could do it, or at least that's what you think. But I had to release and trust my managers and production managers, and trust them to do the job as well as they could, and accept the fact that I wasn't going to make quite as much money because I had to put in this layer of responsibility between me and the job. Right. So learning how to lead and delegate was very difficult. I've read hundreds of books on leadership. I've become a student of leadership, really. So leadership for me is, from my perspective, is one, having a vision, and in creating a vision and an atmosphere that people want to follow.
Any biblical principles that you apply when you think about how you lead people?
Well, the book of Proverbs is the best self-help book ever written by anyone. And I make it a point to read the book of Proverbs at least once a year, and I've encouraged a lot of other people to do it. But just loving other
wisdom there.
Loving other people as yourself it just works. And so to name a particular biblical principle, my whole life is built on that. And I'm not sure if I can. Well, I have to think about it a little bit.
Well, that's a very good one to be based on. And what does the workplace look like? I mean, would you be considered a faith-based business by those on the outside? Is it that apparent, or is it more subtle in terms of what that looks like day to day at Pacific Crest or any of the Bellmont companies?
I think it's more of a subtle. There is no such thing as a Christian company. There's only believers who run companies. Right. And so I would hope that we reflect Jesus in everything we do, and that's mine and my son's goal, is to reflect Jesus in the way we interact with employees, vendors, and customers, and the way we conduct ourselves by keeping our word, always paying our bills on time. We have a corporate chaplain that two of them, a man and a woman, who come every week and meet with our employees, and it's been a great service to them. We have a Bellmont, our Bell Family Foundation, and a Bellmont Family Support System, where our employees who get into financial difficulties, sometimes of their own making, sometimes not, but we're there to help them financially. We are involved. One of our core values is compassion, and to whom much is given, much is required. And so we give back to a lot of activities or ministries around the local area and worldwide that are trying to alleviate poverty, and especially in the Puget Sound region, we support several agencies or ministries that are working with families in crisis.
And is the company also very much involved, in the community from a social standpoint, or is that essentially the company's foundation?
Well, my first response to that is we make our payroll.
Right. That's a primary obligation.
That's a pretty important way to serve our community, is meeting our payroll.
Absolutely.
And paying our taxes, and we're good corporate citizens, and the city we're in loves us, and we're expanding within the city, and they're just they'll do anything for us. So it's really about how do we treat our employees. We try to create a culture of fun. Fun is one of our core values. We want people to enjoy themselves when they're at work.
And how do you go about, finding the right people for the company, the folks that you invest in and hire? Is there certain qualities that you look for? I know you're kind of out of the day-to-day now and your sons are more involved in that. But, as you were bringing people in over the years, what was kind of some of the tells or some of the things that you look for when you were trying to really build out that company culture?
Well, right now it's very difficult to hire people. We're in a very stressful environment where the government unemployment benefits have really hurt employment, because people can make more money sitting at home than they can coming to work.
Right.
So until that changes, it's going to be very difficult. And also the state of Washington legalized marijuana, and we used to have a pretty stringent drug testing, pre-employment drug testing, and we found we couldn't get anyone to work for us, so we had to relax on the marijuana aspect. But it's been really difficult to hire. But first and foremost, we hire, at least at the executive or at the management level, we hire for attitude, and then aptitude. And then actual experience is really the least important to us. If they have the right type of attitude and an aptitude for learning, we can teach them the business. We have our own Bellmont University there, where our employees are allowed to go through that at their pace, and we'll teach them the entire industry from stem to stern, because you can't hire trained people in our industry. They aren't out there. We have to train them ourselves. So we've taken on that responsibility of training employees.
Yeah. And how long does that training program typically last, or is it something that goes on?
It's a 1 year. It's a 1 year, and with 1 or 2 classes every week, and we have teachers. Fantastic. And we have curriculums. We have a leadership program that was a new leadership program that was just launched this last week for those who are desiring to be in leadership at Bellmont. They're encouraged to take this course in using a number of Patrick Lencioni's books to give them a foundation for what we expect out of leadership. One of the things that I learned a long time ago was a thing called alignment of values. That without alignment of values, there's no chance of success in any business. And it almost doesn't matter what those values are, but they have to be aligned. You've got drug dealers who have alignment of values, and their businesses seem to be successful. Right. And at Bellmont, our first course of action was to identify those values, which we did in the early 2000s. And then we needed to align those values with, number one, our employees. And that's when I started doing pre-employment drug testing, and we lost a third of our employees in our shop within the first year. Wow. And we replaced them with better people. Yeah. And then we applied that same standard to our vendors. Do our vendors align with our values? And we've had to fire several of our vendors and find new suppliers with people and companies that aligned with our values. And then finally, we went to our customer base, and we ended up firing about 25% of our customers.
Wow, you don't hear that every day.
And that was the start of our greatest growth spurts starting in around 2001 or 2. Once we got our values aligned with our employees, our vendors, and our customers, our growth took off like a rocket ship.
Wow, isn't that something? Was the customer alignment the hardest? Because it meant you had to basically say no to people that were paying you and, obviously allowing you to pay your employees.
Some of it was difficult. Some of it was really easy, though, because the ones that we weren't aligned with were the ones that weren't paying us.
Yeah, that's an easy call, isn't it?
Or if they were complaining, we talked about personal responsibility, and when a customer, a dealer of ours, we would sell our cabinets to a dealer. Right. A dealer would then, in turn, sell them to an end user. And when the dealer is not willing to take responsibility for their actions and their design flaws and put it all back on us, then we knew we didn't have an alignment fit. And those are the types of dealers and customers that we released, saying that we just can't do business with you. And and so those are we have independent and salaried and our employed sales staff all over the country. But those are the criteria when we look at new customers. We really try to identify their value systems and their credit systems and how professional they are in their business. And we've upped the ante, so to speak, and it's actually gotten a lot better.
You talked about attitude, aptitude, and experience, and then obviously training the people of experience. That's through Bellmont University. Aptitude, I guess, is a lot to do about their qualifications. But how do you kind of get to the types of questions, or what kind of questions do you ask, Steve, to really get at that aptitude, or the attitude rather? What have you found most helpful in terms of sorting the wheat from the chaff? In terms of sorting the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Well, maybe some of those questions HR approved, so to speak.
PC. That's okay.
But I just get people to talk about themselves and talk about their childhood and how they were raised, and frame the questions in such a way that it doesn't really sound like a question. I want people to talk about the things that they really enjoy doing and the things that motivate them and drive them. And what did your parents teach you when you were growing up that had the biggest impact in your life? Those types of questions. Now, we don't discriminate. We want a diverse group of employees. We really want to elevate women and people of color but we have every race, creed, religion, faith in our company, and they all are respected. One of our core values is respect. Everybody deserves to be treated with respect. And we put a lot of effort into trying to help anyone who wants to advance in the company. We want to help them.
Well, listen, you've been very generous with your time, Steve. We always have a couple of questions to ask of all our featured CEOs. And, obviously we kind of starting where ending where we started, the pandemic, we seem to be going into year 2. I mean, vaccinations now seem to be, I think it's over 154 million now that we're recording this in mid-May. We're getting CDCs, saying that we don't have to wear masks for those that are vaccinated, et cetera. You've had, of course, a tremendous pent-up demand. How do you see kind of the world moving forward with this? Do you think this is going to be something that will continue to be with us and continue to have impacts on the business? Or do you see it kind of like a storm that has come through and now we're coming out of it to the other side? What's your perspective?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball, which I don't. I think that it was a storm that came and blew through, but it's going to take a good year or so to come out of it. The damage to the supply chain worldwide has just been severe. Every single industry in the world has been impacted. We're not the only ones. We're plugged in with cabinet suppliers and cabinet manufacturers all around the country, and every single one of them the major cabinet companies are having the exact same struggles we're having. We're not unique. Everyone's having to raise prices. Everybody's struggling to get products. We have a large European supplier that just basically told us don't order anymore until next year. Well, that means that we have to tell our customers we can't sell you this product anymore. So I think it'll pass, but there's been a lot of collateral damage in the process.
A lot of work on the supply chain. Yeah, I hear that from so many CEOs, Steve. It's true. It's really almost every industry has had that impacting because of factories, right, and where things are made, and how people have to change around their whole supply chain and what that looks like. Lastly, we've got a lot of younger listeners on the show. You've had a career that's spanned 4 decades, and some of them aren't even that old yet. What kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their eyes on the corner office, wants to be an entrepreneur like themselves, and build a business or build a family legacy like you're doing today?
Wow, that's a loaded question, isn't it? That's a lot there.
Save the best one for last, Steve.
I was just talking about this with some young people in the last weekend, that first and foremost, get yourself off the throne of your life. And it's others, it's God, and it's others, and it's you. And live a life of complete transparency and integrity. Let your yeas be yeas and your nays be nays, and know that when you speak, people can trust what you say. People want to do business with people they trust. And if you are trustworthy in your family, with your spouse, with your children, and they see this transparency that you're the real deal, it will go a long ways when you get into business. And you're the same person in business that you are at home and that you are at church and you are on the weekend. The same person, transparent all the way through. Do what you say you're going to do, when you say you're going to do it, and you will be in the top 2% of all businesses right there.
Well, Steve Bell, owner and chief executive officer of Pacific Crest Industries, as well as the Bellmont Cabinet Company, thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.